Welcome to the show where we share the stories of the many who intersect with our healthcare system but are rarely heard from. My name is Kevin Poe, founder and editor of KevinMD. Rate and review the show at kevinmd.com/rate. Subscribe at kevinmd.com/podcast. Today in the show, we have Zarya Rubin. She's a physician and a functional medicine coach. Her KevinMD article is titled How Discovering Trauma Changed This Doctor's Life. Zarya, welcome to the show.
Hey, Kevin, thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
We'll get into the article in a little bit. First off, briefly share your story and journey to where you are today.
My journey is definitely not a straight and narrow path. It's more like a circuitous labyrinth of different career choices. And I got into medicine. It was a dream from when I was a little girl. I always wanted to be a doctor, but I took some twists and turns. I actually went to opera school before
Mhm.
going to medical school, and I still sing with the Portland Symphony here. And then I went to medical school and pursued a residency in neurology and a fellowship in epilepsy, adult epilepsy at Columbia in New York, and realized, unfortunately, at the very end of my journey, that I didn't think that pursuing a career in medicine was going to work out for me.
Mm.
So I did a sharp 180 and pivoted out of medicine, worked in industry for a while, was a director of a startup, and then worked in the pharmaceutical industry, became a pharmaceutical executive, and then did another hard pivot and became a stay-at-home mom. Went back to medicine briefly, had a breastfeeding medicine practice, and then decided that health coaching was really going to be the path I wanted to take. It was going to fulfill a lot of my desires and need to heal and help people while still taking care of my mental health and honoring who I am, the square peg in the round hole that
Mhm.
I kept trying to hammer into a medical career. Yeah, that's where I'm at now. And I have a functional medicine practice called Wild Lilac Wellness, where I coach mostly women, the occasional man, and where I'm also pursuing group programs and public speaking and workshops and all of that. Mix and match, choose your own adventure, if you will.
So, for those who aren't familiar with functional medicine, just briefly tell my audience what that is.
Yeah, so functional medicine is something that's been around for a while, but it really wasn't too prevalent when I was in medical school, because I think that if I had known more about it back then, I might have pursued that path. It might have been a little straighter. Who knows? We'll never know. Functional medicine really is about the concept of the interconnectedness between all of the body systems rather than just being a very subspecialized, this is my area. If I'm a foot doctor, I don't care about the kidney or
Mhm.
about the gut or the heart. It's all interconnected because obviously our body is one whole entity, and really looking at the root causes for things rather than just looking at symptom constellations and making diagnoses. It's more about, why are these symptoms present? What is underlying this from a sort of socio-psychological perspective, as well as in biochemical, immunological. We really go deep in things like biochemistry, gut health,
Mm.
trying to puzzle piece together what's going on for the individual person in front of us, rather than, oh, this looks like this diagnosis because that's what other folks have, these symptoms, so you must have that. It's more like, symptoms can lead to many different diagnoses, and many different diagnoses can present as many different symptom constellations. And it's really about figuring out why this individual person at this time in their life
Mm.
is presenting this way, and how we can hopefully reverse the process before entrenched disease sets in.
All right. And let's talk about your Kevin MD article. And this is a
Sure.
major part of your life. It's titled How Discovering Trauma Changed This Doctor's Life. For those who didn't get a chance to read your article, just walk my audience through it. Share the story why you decided to write it.
Yeah, this was a really personal article, and I struggled a bit with whether I wanted to share it all publicly. And then I thought to myself that the story deserves to be told, and that hopefully other physicians would benefit from it and maybe recognize a little bit of themselves in it. So, unbeknownst to me, I was diagnosed with PTSD as an adult in my mid 40s. I did not know that I had this. It's because it wasn't a classic presentation. I thought, I've never been in the army, I've never suffered a major trauma. But I didn't realize that as a child, I had had multiple medical traumas, and some quite serious ones, and serious diagnoses, being told I had a couple months to live, things like that really affect you as a child. And I didn't realize the impact that it had on my life. I kept everything to myself. The whole, I'm fine, everything's fine. I can do this. I'm tough. As doctors, I think we are conditioned in some ways to be superhuman and to really disconnect from our feelings and our inner selves and just present this hard outer shell that has to be really resilient in the face of what we deal with on a day-to-day basis. I went through medical school and residency and really struggled. Not academically, I was the top of my class, but personally and psychologically, I had panic attacks. I had trouble being in the hospital. I had trouble working one-on-one with patients, trouble in the OR. I was like always nearly passing out and really just had these symptoms that I couldn't place. I thought they were anxiety. I realized later that they were, in fact, flashbacks to personal trauma that I had. And it wasn't until long after leaving medicine that I was able to figure all of this out, to finally get a diagnosis, to finally address the unresolved trauma issues, to get treatment for it, and to reintegrate my life. And who knows, if that had been addressed earlier, maybe I would have been able to continue on in medicine. I think it's so important for physicians to get the mental health support that we need and deserve and that isn't always there. And it certainly wasn't back in the day. I went through medicine in the mid 90s, early 2000s. I think it's gotten a lot better now. There's a lot more awareness. It was just Physician Suicide Awareness
Yep.
Day, I think it was last week. And that is just something that is really eye-opening that we're not aware of, that so many of our colleagues feel so desperate that they take their own lives. And I think it's a real wake-up call for all of us to pay more attention to mental health and medicine. It's like physician, heal thyself. So that was a real lesson I needed to learn.
So you mentioned that these symptoms went years without a proper diagnosis. So tell me, who made the diagnosis and how did you discover that these were flashbacks to incidents of trauma in your past?
So nothing against all of the providers and therapists and counselors that I worked with all throughout my life, but I was just simply told over and over that, oh, I had some panic attacks, but we would do CBT and they'd go away. Or, oh, you have anxiety, or I don't know, you're Jewish and whatever, and you're neurotic and it's all good. And I accepted that and kept going and thought, maybe this is just how people are. This is how everyone feels. Maybe everyone feels the world is about to come crashing down at any moment, or maybe everyone feels that the tiniest symptom is a fatal diagnosis. Maybe that's just like normal. So I normalized it for myself. And then it really just came to a head after I became a mother. And then the anxiety levels just increased 100-fold once you have a child to also worry about. And so I was no longer able to suppress my symptoms. It was interesting. I was able to lead this double life of, I had this inner world that was very tumultuous and full of anxiety and turmoil. And I had this outer world that I presented as very calm and unruffled and everything's fine, I'm perfect. And really that duality, it became too much to sustain. I went to see actually my family doctor, who was a PA. She was a Black woman who had experience in trauma, a lot of experience in trauma and racial trauma and intergenerational trauma. And she was quite brilliant in figuring it out, because even when I saw a psychiatrist, he scratched his head and said, are you sure you have
Mhm.
PTSD? And then he did the intake and we did all the symptom inventories and whatnot. And he was like, wow, yeah, good for that PA. Yes, I owe her a lot. Leslie Gregory, she's amazing at Solwood Medical in Portland, and she does really great work for the community in trauma. And yeah, I owe her a lot because I really discounted it. And I
Hmm.
think that probably PTSD is a lot more prevalent than we think. I looked at actually one study recently that of physicians and incidence of PTSD, and it ranged from like 12 to 38%, which is huge, because I don't think that awareness is there, that given what we're exposed to on a regular basis, that it is very possible that some of us may develop PTSD. And that's something that more research is needed as to who is going to develop it and when and how. But certainly, first you have to be aware of it in order to diagnose it.
So you mentioned that if this was diagnosed earlier, or even when you were practicing medicine, this could have changed the course of your career. You could have stayed in clinical practice. So I guess if you were to do this all over again, is there anything that you would have done differently?
Gosh, I think that we always say that hindsight is 2020 and who knows what would have happened. And I have to believe that everything happens for a reason, and this was the path that I was meant to be on. It's a very difficult path to walk, and I think I actually was listening to one of your episodes recently with a neurosurgeon, and I thought that was a great episode, and he speaks to the notion of, well, if you're not a doctor, then who are you? Because it's not a job, it's not a career, it's an identity for many of us, and to be able to separate from that and say, you know what, I've invested so much of this, not only my time and my finances, but my soul and my identity, to say, I'm going to now walk away from this and separate from this. It's a really hard ask, I think. And I think a lot of physicians probably struggle with that. And I was thinking to myself, I can stick it out. I can go another 30 years and 40 years until retirement. I can do this. And then I thought, geez, this is crazy. At a certain point, you have to say to yourself, and I came across this proverb that really did change my life, that was, no matter how far you've gone down the wrong road, turn back. And that really gave me the permission to change my life and to take this incredible leap of faith, jump off a cliff without a parachute and think, hopefully the parachute's going to magically appear and open. And luckily it did. And there is life after medicine. You can make a different choice and you can find fulfillment and satisfaction. It's not always an easy choice to make.
Now, when you were practicing clinical medicine, what kind of symptoms were you having? I want to ask this because there are other clinicians who are out there and may have similar symptoms and they may have undiagnosed PTSD. So tell my
Sure.
audience,
Yeah.
what exactly were you feeling when you were practicing and your PTSD was still not diagnosed?
Yeah, so I think it can masquerade as a lot of other things, can masquerade as depression, as anxiety. There can be comorbidities with these other conditions, but it can also be confusing, be misdiagnosed. I think there's a lot of overlap with burnout as well and disassociation. So I think I probably had elements of all of those, but really the underlying factor was the PTSD. So I was incredibly anxious all the time, but I had symptoms of anxiety like palpitations, sweatiness, trouble breathing. This intensified, of course, when I was in the hospital and in clinical situations. Obviously, you're sleep deprived as well, which I think really doesn't help if you have a mental health diagnosis alongside of that. So the sleep deprivation exacerbates, everything feels worse, everything feels more intense. There was also the inability to leave work at work. I would constantly be perseverating and ruminating about, did I do the right thing for this patient? Did I write the right dose for this medication? And I would just never be able to let anything go. I was a super perfectionist and always just wondering, I'm going to go double check this. I'm going to triple check this. It was almost an element of OCD to it. I would feel my pager going off all the time, like day, night, middle of the night. I'd wake up. Sometimes I'd call the ward and I'd say, is my pager working? Guys haven't called me. And they're like, dude, go back to sleep. Like,
Yeah.
what is wrong with you? And so there was this hypervigilance that I think is characteristic of PTSD. There was also a hypersensitivity to stimuli, so to noise. I was hypersensitive. If someone would drop a glass or something, I would jump 20 feet. And then there was always the kind of like looking for escape routes in public places, always trying to, where's the exit? If something bad happens, how can I get out of this? And the constant fear that something terrible was going to happen, the other shoe was going to drop. And I think that those are all pretty classic manifestations that can be ignored. They can be misdiagnosed or misinterpreted. And I would say if you're experiencing any of this, don't suffer in silence. Don't try to deal with it on your own. And you can deal with it in other ways. I would run like 2 hours a day in medical school, I was trying to outrun my problems, I think. And yes, exercise is great for mental health on one side of things. And on the other side, there is a limit to how much is too much, and seek help. Go see a counselor, speak to somebody, speak to a friend. Don't try to take it on your own.
We're talking to Zarya Rubin. She's a physician and functional medicine coach. Her KevinMD article is titled How Discovering Trauma Changed This Doctor's Life. Zarya, what are some of your take-home messages that you want to leave with the KevinMD audience?
Oh gosh, there's so many things that I would love to share with my physician colleagues. And I really take my hat off to all of them who have endured the pandemic. And my God, talk about PTSD and stress. So I think we're going to actually be seeing a lot more diagnoses in the coming years as a result of the pandemic. And I think a lot of people are going to be realizing that, my gosh, this career, while it is so important and maybe it's love and maybe it's passion, but it can really take a lot out of you. And I would urge people to take care of themselves first. You have to put your own oxygen mask on first before you can help others. The first thing they tell you on the
Hmm.
airplane. And I think in medicine, we often forget that. We are so outwardly focused of serving others and helping others. And we just think that somehow magically we're going to get taken care of. And we don't even go to the bathroom when we're on call or don't make our own doctor's appointments. I don't think I ever went to the dentist when I was a resident because it's like, who has time for that? I have to be superhuman. I have to take care of others first. So I would urge anyone listening to really just look inward. If you've got symptoms, if you've got what you think may be a mental health issue, get it addressed. Go seek help. There's no shame in it anymore. There is still, of course, mental health stigma. And I think a lot of us were afraid to be labeled or diagnosed or what will my colleagues think. But I think they'll think that you're a lot stronger for speaking up and raising awareness and getting the help that you deserve so you can be a better clinician so that you don't burn out, that you maybe don't leave medicine, or that maybe you find another way to practice it. Maybe you go part time, maybe you
Hmm.
find a different way to practice. There's also no shame in that. And there's so many ways that as physicians, we can use our gifts and our intelligence and our training and serve and find a way that works for you, for your family, and for your health, because we all deserve it. We all deserve to be healthy and happy.
Zarya, thank you so much for sharing your story time and insight. And thanks again for being on the show.
Thank you, Kevin. It was a pleasure.